A city councilor is working with female students of color in Boston to recommend changes in school policy and climate. This summer, they're holding a series of focus groups to suggest how schools can be more responsive and how students can get more access to services. The initiative's in partnership with the Black Women's Justice Institute. To tell us about the initiative is City Councilor at Large, Ayanna Pressley. Thank you very much for being with us, Councilor.
Oh, wonderful to be back with you, Chris. Thank you.
I know long before this, you've been an advocate for young women, students, girls in the school systems, but what is it that you see in Boston, at least, that tells you that schools can be doing a better job?
Well, the data supports that for most girls, school is the safest place in their life. It's the most stabilizing place. There's that continuity. And so it is discouraging and worrisome when you see a trend of girls that are increasingly disproportionately suspended, expelled, and becoming justice involved. So the point is, the school to prison pipeline is not a situation only for boys, but it is a growing situation for our girls. And so again, for most girls, school is the safest environment for them. And so when those environments become environments that are hostile or feel unsafe, or dominated by punishment and policies that are supposed to be neutral but that have a disparate impact on them, it's worth looking at that and reforming those policies. So I'm very excited about this initiative. I've partnered with Dr. Monique Morris. I am a huge fan of hers. She is the author of the book Push Out, The Criminalization of Black Girls in Our Schools. She's with the National Black Women's Justice Institute. And so I'm very excited about the fact that we have engaged, 160 girls this week in evidence-based focus groups, and it's very legitimate. They are receiving a stipend. These are, well thought out, robust sort of line of questioning. We're talking to Latina, young Latinas, Somali girls, African American girls, really the whole spectrum, and empowering them as policymakers. Because at the end of this, we'll take all of the data that we've collected and we'll be submitting these as recommendations to our schools. And I should say that this is about all of our schools. We have a focus group of MECO girls. We have girls that are in parochial schools, in private schools, in district schools. So we want to make sure that we are listening to them actively and that we are incorporating into these policies, their experiences.
We had a notorious case involving a charter school outside the city of Boston involving students and their hair, students being penalized. But what about Boston? I mean, aren't there other schools that maybe have restrictions on dress code or grooming? What about that? Absolutely.
And again, that is the purpose of these evidence-based focus groups, Project Focus GOC, Girls of Color, in partnership with the National Black Women's Justice Institute, is to hear from the girls about the policies in their different school communities and what that impact has been on them. Because again, if we are truly committed to their wholeness, to their academic outcomes, to their success both in school and in life, it really is important that these school climates be ones that are welcoming and that foster these girls in achieving their fullest potential and being their best selves. And so we're learning from them right now. We had the first focus groups today, and so we'll be doing that for the rest of the week.
Now, maybe more often with boys, we hear about discipline problems that really underneath the surface reflect something else, maybe stress, maybe an incarcerated family member. How do you deal with that?
Sure. Well, I've been banging the drum for a long time, advocating for greater investment in social-emotional wellness supports within our Boston public schools. We know that trauma is a barrier to learning, that many of our students have experienced the ACEs, adverse childhood exposures. Trauma takes on many manifestations. And trauma is not just about experiencing or being exposed to violence. Poverty is very traumatic. Domestic violence is very traumatic. The threat of deportation or displacement is very traumatic. And so in order for us to teach the whole child, we have to make those investments, those social-emotional wellness supports, so that once they cross that threshold, we're then making those investments in the wraparound supports so they can receive whatever's being taught to them. Also, as the child of a formerly incarcerated parent, I've partnered with the Big Sister Association of Boston, as a part of a national initiative, The Power of Mentoring, to recruit 72 big sisters for girls who have incarcerated caregivers. Thanks to the fierce love of my mother, I was able to defy many of the odds for children who have an incarcerated caregiver, but the statistics bear out that children with incarcerated parents are 4 times more likely to drop out, to violently offend, or to have an unplanned pregnancy.
This is BNN News. We're talking with City Councilor Ayanna Pressley. Talk about the process going forward, because this seems to coincide with the new initiative in the Boston Public Schools about the social and emotional learning that's going to be expanded. So this might be a good time for some new ideas to filter up too.
No, absolutely, and I have to commend Superintendent Chang in that we have created a socio-emotional learning and wellness superintendent. We're the first in the country to do that, Dr. Amalio Nieves. I work very closely with him. I've also been advocating for our schools, all of them, to be trauma sensitive and trauma informed. It's important that we're building up that resilience in our children and our students year round, and not just in the face of a more amplified traumatic event. If you're building up that resilience and that a safe community year-round, when there are situations that occur, things that disrupt their learning, that disrupt their lives, they will resolve those matters and rebound more effectively. And so I've held several screenings in partnership with Boston Public Schools about some successful school models that are trauma-sensitive and trauma-informed. And so it is my hope that we will get to the point where every Boston Public School will make those investments, and that access to those services will not be arbitrary or ad hoc, but district-wide. And so I know that commitment exists. I'm just going to continue to advocate for the financial investment.
I want to ask you about another issue you've been working on for quite a while, and that is more access to affordable alcoholic beverage licenses for some of the outlying neighborhoods in the city where there's a scarcity. So far, that hasn't worked as well as people have been hoping. You're trying to do something to fix that.
Oh, I think it's been a great success. I mean, if you put in context the fact that this is a 100-year-old law, and in 3 years I've been trying to undo 100 years of hurt. So I'm very encouraged by our progress, although not yet satisfied. And at the end of the day, Chris, whether we're talking about gender-specific and responsive programming to meet the unique needs and challenges of our girls, or whether we're talking about liquor licenses, I view every issue through a lens of equity. And I believe every neighborhood in the city of Boston should have an equity and opportunity to build community and to build wealth. The restaurant industry is really at the heart of my economic development agenda. I'm very passionate about this industry. It's a path of least resistance for many people with barriers to employment, immigrants, those with quarries, the opportunity for upward mobility. 2 out of 4 restaurants is owned by someone that started in the front or the back of the house. And so we were very successful. We were able to onboard through the council and working with 2 mayors in our legislature, because I've been on this path for a very long time. We were able to increase 75 licenses over a period of 3 years, 80% of those restricted to neighborhoods historically disenfranchised and marginalized. And that's a game changer because those licenses are non-transferable. So that is wealth building in perpetuity. The city now has control of the licensing board. And so, again, I'm encouraged by our progress. We've eliminated the most cost-prohibitive barrier. Those full alcohol licenses were going for $250,000. Beer and wine were $35,000 to $55,000, and now they're going for $2,700 to $3,000. And so, we've made a much lower threshold for aspiring restaurateurs to participate. For those existing restaurants that were finally able to get a license, their bottom line has improved by 30 to 40%. And for restaurants that were struggling to open, they've now been able to open. Because again, no matter how good your food is, your profit margin is going to be made on your bar. So now we have filed a second home rule petition in partnership with Mayor Walsh. We had our first hearing. We'll be going into a working session. And if we are successful, over the next 3 years, we would be onboarding 150 more licenses, 15, 15, and 15 for each neighborhood, because what we learned in our last legislation is that we're still pitting neighborhood against neighborhood. And for neighborhoods like Mattapan, where no one applied, we need more time to build a bench there.
And Mattapan borders on a dry community. Isn't that an opportunity for somebody?
Absolutely. I have to tell you that I've had many a conversation with aspiring restaurateurs or existing restaurateurs telling them to invest in Mattapan, and they don't believe there's a market there. I know better than that. This is the largest concentration of homeowners in the city, and I do believe that Mattapan will support those walkable amenities, deserves to have those walkable amenities. This is about activating streetscapes. This is about vitality. This is about quality of life. This is about higher property value for people that live in that neighborhood, and it incentivizes more people into the neighborhood, and it's public safety. Restaurants create a collateral sidewalk when you have vitality and the streets teeming with people. So with Mattapan specifically, they'll get 15 licenses if we're successful over a period of 3 years, 5, 5, and 5. So if no one applies the first year, it will bankroll to the next, and so on. And that will allow us to address the disparities in lending and also to do the other mentorship and things we need to do to build up a pipeline.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
City Councilor Ayanna Pressley. We'll have more news in just a moment.